I almost didn't even know what to talk about this week. And as I sat down to collect my thoughts and think about what I'm going to record, it was like, what even really happened? What's the story here? And I caught myself with like a little production filter going off in my brain, like I'm actually making some kind of Netflix show here. And it's like I can hear the producer in the background saying, yeah, this is all great, but we need more of a storyline. We need something juicy. We need some drama, because the reality of it all is that these episodes are starting to feel a little like I'm just showing up talking about nothing. And I don't mean that I'm sitting here saying, like, I should never have done this. What was I thinking? This was a bad idea. None of that is going through my head, because I do think that documenting what I'm working on every week is valuable, really valuable endeavor for many different reasons. But back when I had this brilliant idea to do this, I truly thought there would be more, for lack of a better word, stuff, more cool stuff to talk about. This was going to be really interesting. More plot twists, more breakthroughs, more bright ideas, more processes, more content. And then I realized that's the episode. That's what we got to talk about this week, because I am living the exact thing I promised to talk about. I'm living it right now in real time while I'm recording. Every journey starts with a choice, and mine is a bet. For 1 year, I'm gambling on energy over strategy. No more forcing and no pushing. Just the courage to show up and see what happens when reality becomes my playground. This isn't a podcast. It's a real-time experiment in the lab of my life. Welcome to the bet. So at the end of last week's episode, I touched a bit on what I wanted to talk about this week, which is the power of compounding. And I said I wanted to talk about something that came up in the middle of all the processing that I had going on, which is the tension I was feeling between knowing that compounding is really effective. Compounding works. Staying with something over time is how you build anything of value. And also being someone who naturally moves on quickly from things that she gets bored of. I am a manifesting generator. I'm a Gemini. I have a 1-3 profile in my human design, which means I'm the consummate investigator, hands-on experimenter. I'm very much designed to sample, taste, explore, move on to the next thing. And I don't have a history of sticking with things. I don't think I've ever stuck with one thing for my entire life. And honestly, everything about me feels anti-compounding. Like that's just how I am. And I had this thought a few weeks ago that kind of shook me. Like, what if I am never going to see the true results of what I'm capable of? What if I'm never going to be able to achieve what I want because I can't stick with anything long enough? I don't see it through. And that thought did not feel great. But I decided to sit with it and just let it be. And this week, something really sprouted from that. So I want to back up and explain what I mean by the compound zone, because I think this is really helpful for anyone out there working towards something, building something. I was reading something about Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, and he was talking about the power of compounding. And I think all of us know this, right? How Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world. And the basic principle is that small, consistent changes over time are what create extraordinary results. It's not dramatic. It's not flashy, just small and dogged and consistent and relentless, day after day after day after day. And this is how anything of value gets built. No matter what you're looking at, everything that grows goes through the process of compounding. Investments work this way. Human evolution works this way. We are the product of literally millions of years of tiny, small adaptations. Think of Olympic performance, weight loss, business, progressive overload, right? Where you're adding a little more weight each workout. Instagram, you show up consistently, one post at a time, every single day, one more conversation with somebody. And that's how you build a friendship. And over time, these tiny increments compound into something that looks like overnight success to everyone on the outside. But we all forget, because we're used to being the spectator who sees the fantastic results, we forget as spectators that the compounding zone is boring as fuck. Just is. And this article I was reading tied this whole concept to the image of Sisyphus pushing that boulder up a hill. Every day he would start pushing that boulder up the hill, and then he'd get tired and set it back down. He'd have to start over the next day. And that's the pattern most of us fall into. We get an idea, we get inspired, we start pushing our boulder with everything we got, and then it gets heavy and we set it down. We lose our steam. We get distracted. We start over with a new boulder, or we go back to the same boulder and try to pick it up. And that is the definition of intermittent effort. That's what breaks the compound effect every single time. And the people who build extraordinary things are not necessarily smarter or more talented. They just never put their boulder down. So here's what I realized about myself this week. When things start to feel boring and repetitive, that's when I want to move on. I've known that about myself for a while. My brain reads boring as a signal that this isn't it anymore. I should be investing my energy elsewhere, that I should pivot, that all the juice has been squeezed and it's time for me to find a new orange. But I have been confusing two things that are not the same, right? Boring doesn't mean non-meaningful. And I, see this play out in Instagram, most recently for me. When I post on Instagram every single day, my own content starts to feel repetitive and predictable and, dare I say, generic. It gives me the ick because I've seen it so many times. And it's so easy to take how I'm feeling about it and make it mean that that's how the entire world interacts with it. Everyone who sees it must feel that same way. But it's not reality, right? Nobody spends as much time staring at my content as I do. At least I hope not. And they're not seeing it every single day the way I am. They're not obsessing over which word to put where, and did you explain this part of it enough? And is this really drawing the reader in? And does this make sense? And what information do they need for context? And all the things I think about. They don't spend nearly that amount of time interacting with it. So, of course, it feels stale to me or overdone or repetitive because I've seen it 8,000 times versus somebody that it's the first time they're seeing it. And even if they have seen tons of similar posts from me before, that's actually the point. Right? That's actually the point of building a brand, Laura. That is how trust gets built. That's how people start to recognize my voice. And that's also compounding. I had a very similar experience during my physical transformation a few years ago. There was this mother of plateaus I went through, 4 months, where it looked like absolutely nothing was happening. Not only was the scale not moving, my measurements weren't changing. And I was following the plan to a T. Tracking the macros, showing up for my workouts, doing everything diligently. And the scale wasn't moving or budging, and my measurements weren't changing. Nothing visible was shifting for 4 months. And most people hit that kind of plateau and get frustrated. And believe me, I did. I got pissed. They think this isn't working. Something must be wrong. I need to try a different approach. But that's not what's happening here in current time. I'm not getting frustrated and pissed that nothing's happening. I'm getting bored. Same kind of trap, but it's a different doorway. So I'm in a very similar kind of plateau where it feels like I'm showing up, doing the thing every day, but I don't really feel the energy or the drive behind it necessarily the way I did in the beginning. And the story I'm telling myself while I'm in it is what the actual problem is. And here's where it gets tricky for someone with my proclivities, let's call them my energetic proclivities to jump around and be like a little pinball that likes to go all over. As a manifesting generator, I'm built to take action on what lights me up. My energy is meant to respond to things that feel exciting. That is how I operate best. And I've had great success doing that. So when something stops feeling exciting, when it starts to feel like a slog, energetically, my whole system just kind of contracts. And I interpret that as a sign to move on. And here's the neuroscience of what's actually happening in your brain when this occurs. Your brain runs on dopamine, loves dopamine. It loves to be the little doggy that does tricks for dopamine because it's a quick hit of pleasure. But dopamine loves novelty. When something is new project, new workout plan, new relationship, new content strategy, brain releases dopamine because it's anticipating a reward. That's the excitement. That's the spark. But once something becomes predictable, the dopamine levels drop. And it doesn't mean the thing stopped working. It's just because it's not new anymore. And here's the problem with that. Your brain interprets that dopamine drop as a signal that it reads as less dopamine means this isn't rewarding us anymore. Not getting that reward. So it must be time to find something better, more pleasurable. But that is a miscalculation. It's a misinterpretation. The drop in dopamine is not evidence that you should quit. It's just a sign that the novelty is wearing off. All the value is still there. In fact, you're just now uncovering the value of compounding. Compounding effect is still building. Your brain just isn't getting the same chemical hit it got on day 1 or week 1. So when I say my design wants me to follow what lights me up, this is the mechanism underneath it. This is the neurochemistry going down. My brain is chasing dopamine, and dopamine fades in the compound zone. It's just biology that I need to understand and work with instead of obey. The compounding zone does not feel exciting, and that's the whole point. The magic happens in the boring, repetitive, very unsexy middle of it all. So how do I reconcile that, right? How do I make compounding work for someone who's designed to follow what lights them up? So I've been sitting with this, and I think the answer is making the boring part feel exciting, just like I did in my weight loss transformation. So it's not about adding more stuff or changing the strategy or switching gears. It is about staying lit up on the intention of what it is I'm here to do, even when the daily action feels repetitive. And what I mean by that is letting my core intention compound. That's the thing I'm locked into every single day. That topic stays the same, but the angles I might approach it are where I can play around with the excitement. And then I had this kind of download on Friday that sealed it for me, because I was thinking about this push and pull I always have, go through these cycles about staying full-time at the university or leaving to do my business full-time. And one of the narratives that plays out on the regular is, if I left, I would really have to make this work. Like there'd be no more safety net. I'd have to show up every single day and figure it out. And I don't know that I want that pressure. And for whatever reason, this Friday morning, when I had my little frequent flyer narrative come through, it hit me. It's no different than what I'm already doing. I already make it work every single day. I make my life work. I make the university work. Even when my time is being allocated to things I don't enjoy, I show up for admissions interviews and committee meetings and student evaluations and all of it. And I find a way to make it work. So why would I believe that I couldn't somehow do that in this business? So the story I've been telling myself is I don't stick with things, but that's not actually true. I've stuck with studying language for years, in the brain for years. I've stuck with raising my son. I've stuck with my marriage. I've stuck with showing up for the bet every single week. Here I am on week 21, doing the damn thing, even though it doesn't feel like I have something new to tell you, even though I don't know what I'm going to say, even though it feels boring. I do stick with things. I just had the evidence filed incorrectly. So, it's not really can I stick with it? It's will I stick with it when no one's watching? Because in business, if you slack off, you can just disappear into the shadows. No one's going to know except you. There is no boss checking in on you. There's no accountability built into the structure of running your own business. But I would know, right? I would know. And apparently, I already know how to show up for things, even when no one's watching, because I've been doing it my whole life. So the reframe I'm landing on is this. Compounding doesn't require rigidity of sticking with the same thing over and over. It requires being consistent in my intention. I've been compounding my understanding of how the mind works for 15, 16, 17 years, right? The delivery method changes, coaching, teaching, podcasting, writing, but the core obsession has stayed the same. So I'm not flitting from thing to thing. I'm circling the same mountain from different elevations. I love how that feels. That's compounding. I just didn't recognize it necessarily. And I think this all ties into something I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is how much of our own personal power do we leak into performance, performing our transformations, performing our goals for other people, into making ourselves busy, into coming up with cool things to talk about when our friends call, into having some kind of interesting life that looks good from the outside. I saw two of my dear friends yesterday. They were passing through town and they stopped by to have a coffee date, some lunch, and they were like, tell me all the stuff you have going on. Let me hear it all. I know you're so busy. What's going on? And I caught myself in this moment of trying to come up with something good enough to share, something interesting, a good story. Ooh, what can I tell them about? Something that would make my life sound like it's moving and rocking and shaking and doing all the big things. Luckily, these are the kind of friends who are like sisters. So I was able to just take a breath and fully be me. But that moment of even catching myself thinking that stuck with me because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's what I was doing at the beginning of the episode, right? Trying to come up with something good enough to report, interesting enough to keep your attention. Looking for the Netflix storyline and feeling like nothing good enough really happened this week. But the quote unquote real work of living your life with intention every day, of moving yourself forward, of leading yourself through this boring, predictable, repetitive action doesn't necessarily make a good Netflix episode because we can't condense it down to a little montage scene with a cool song in the background, right? This real work is showing up on day 147 when it feels like day 42 and day 83 and day 116, all the days, right? The real work is pushing the boulder and not putting it back down, even if nobody's there clapping for you or cheering you on. That's the real work. So I've been calling it the quiet revolution. Stop performing your transformation. Take off the masks. Let the boring middle be the boring middle. Let it be boring, because trying to make something interesting for the sake of it is leaking your energy, leaking your power. If you're in a boring middle right now, if you're showing up every day and it feels like nothing's happening, I want you to hear this. That is a good sign. That is a sign that things are working. It is a sign that you have entered the compounding zone. The boulder is moving on up, so do not set it down. Because the people who build extraordinary things are the ones who find a way to make holding the boulder feel amazing. And that's just a mental game. And I am a pro at mental games. I can reframe anything. Problem for me is being aware of it, bringing it into my awareness. So you got to find a way to make it exciting. You got to find a way to plug into that feeling. So next week is month 5 check-in. We've been doing this 5 months. Look at the same old numbers. Same old numbers I report on every month. See what's actually, this might be the only podcast that listeners drop over the year. I'm starting to fear that now. It's like, this is the most boring thing ever. But that means it's going to be successful, right? Because we keep showing up. That is the mental trick, the part that says, not going to work. This isn't good. You got to quit. Start over. Nobody's going to notice. But honestly, even if the numbers are boring, I'm so okay with that, because that is proof that we're compounding. So we'll see you next week. Until then, go bet on yourself.